Hi everybody, my name's Dee Dee Vergatos from In the Know Radio, and today we're going to be interviewing A.L Ward, who is undoubtedly one of the oldest hypnotists to still be practicing. He's 92 years old and has a 60-year track record. Before becoming a highly acclaimed hypnotist, healer, author, and instructor, having taught at 5 different colleges, A.L served with the Navy on the aircraft carrier Intrepid from 1944 to 1945, where upon returning home, he obtained his commercial pilot's license. He then went on to join the San Bernardino, California Police Department in 1955, eventually retiring in 1980. It was a police investigation that originally led Al to several years of study with a master hypnotist, where he was one of the first to use the science of hypnosis in the police service. Following his retirement, he earned a California State College teaching credential in law enforcement forensic investigation. One of Al's biggest contributions to the field of hypnosis was when he assisted in the Parks Research Education Project. This research explored the use of hypnosis in documented medical problems that were not responding to orthodox medical procedures. From this research, he developed a method for exploring the origin, cause, and solution of any physical, emotional, or spiritual deficiencies in a matter of minutes. Al noted that most health problems have a universally consistent pattern of negative emotions that cause physical deficiencies. Al has lectured and taught extensively on hypnosis, regression therapy, and other mind dynamics at schools, colleges, service clubs, and private organizations, and he has appeared on several television shows. He has also been the recipient of many awards, which include the National Guild of Hypnotists Award for Presenter of the Year, the Guild's Order of the Braid in recognition of a lifetime service of professional hypnotism, as well as the International Hypnosis Federation's Award of Excellence and their Lifetime Achievement Award. Through his astounding work in hypnosis, Al has been able to resolve medical issues such as multiple sclerosis, brain damage, and the removal of tumors, to name a few, which were medically confirmed and documented to be true both before and after he administered his hypnosis sessions. Al goes into detail about these case studies and many more in the 5 books he has authored throughout the years. And for all you UFO enthusiasts, Al was the hypnotist who worked with John Burroughs in the Rendelsham Bentwater's UFO incident in 1979. So welcome, Al. Thanks for being here today.
Thank you for your invitation.
Not a problem. It's my pleasure to interview one of the perhaps oldest practicing hypnotists. So why don't you tell us the story, Al, about what first piqued your interest in hypnosis?
Well, it was a police investigation to inquire into a problem. And arriving at the house, the woman led us into her living room where her husband was sitting in a chair, gripping the arms and stiff as a board. She said he had gone to the wrestling matches that evening, and one of the wrestlers was a hypnotist who put on a show after the matches, and knowing that he couldn't be hypnotized, he volunteered. And they put him in the ring and had him grip the ropes, and suddenly he found he couldn't turn loose and couldn't get out of the chair. So after the matches, he was released and sent home, and he sat down in this chair while his wife fixed some coffee for him and started to tell her about his experience, and suddenly he was back in gripping the chair.
The trance again, yeah.
So they called the arena, but the hypnotist had already gone for Los Angeles. Tell him to wake up, and if that don't work, put an ice cube on his neck. And neither worked. So they called their family doctor, who must have known something about hypnosis, and he reminded them, my hours are from 8 to 5. If he's like that in the morning, bring him in. So then they called the police department, and I was the one dispatched. And I got to thinking, well, if ice cube don't work, something warm might. So I got a wash rag and got it warm under the tap of the water, and went in and laid it on his arm, and he just
He
come
broke
out.
out of the trance.
I thought, boy, I said, how do you feel? He says, I feel great. So he was that way for 2 hours, and I thought, boy, I need to know something about this.
So that was what started you on
So
your
that's
journey.
what I found in the personal column, a hypnotist that was from Austria with 23 years as a hypnotist. And in those days, before certification come along, you could be a master hypnotist in 12 hours of instruction.
Wow.
So
how did it take off after that? You studied
well,
for a while.
I studied about 3 hours into it, and was led to do a past life regression with a 15-year-old girl. And one of the female students had brought her daughter, and so I was assigned to do a regression with her. And instead of directing her to go back to another life experience, I just told her to go to a time before she was born into her present life and tell me where she was. And she says, I'm in heaven.
Oh, so she actually went in between lives.
Yeah, because, just before you're born. So anyhow, the girl I was working with was 15-year-old Irene, and the contact I made was Rebecca, 26 years old.
So when you say contact, you mean that you spoke to someone through her?
Yeah, another personality through Irene.
Okay.
And so I says, are you, Irene, the same? And her answer was, we are the same, but I am further ahead in time than she is, and we will unite later. Then she says, you must be privileged to be able to talk to me. Nobody from your realm has ever talked to me before. And so we began talking about the spirit world. And that experience led me into working a full 10 years with that young lady, communicating with people from the spirit world.
So 3 hours in, you hypnotize someone back into an in-between life state, contact another entity from another dimension, and you got lots of information for 10 years. So what was Rebecca telling you from that other dimension about the spiritual world?
Well, the spiritual world, everybody is separated into levels according to their spiritual growth and knowledge.
Right.
And the levels are identified by robes of different style, different design, and so forth, which not only gives their level, but spatial talents and so forth. And as an example of her suggesting I was privileged, shortly after that I worked with one of my nephews, 16 years old, and when I made contact with his spirit self, he says, I don't know you, and I'm not going to answer your questions. And I says, well, that's okay. I've talked to people higher up the rank than you are. He says, yeah, who? And I says, Rebecca. He says, Rebecca, I know her. She's at the highest, and you talk to her. I know you know more than I do, but I still have to check up on you. And a week later, I made contact with him through hypnosis, and he says, okay, I checked up on you. What do you want to know? And he tells me in the spirit world that Jesus was teaching classes, and that he would walk amongst the students and touch them on the shoulder and give them extra energy. And then he told me something I had not heard before, and I haven't heard since. He said that when Jesus was born, his mother knitted a robe for him. And that robe grew with him like a living thing, and it never soiled. And in the future that will be discovered and add information that he was our Savior. Well, I had the opportunity to listen to the entire Bible this year on tape, and I found 2 instances where Jesus was walking amongst the people, and 2 different occasions somebody touched the hem of his robe and he felt it. So there makes a connection there. So anyhow, why Rebecca and other spiritual people, through my clients and through my students and classes, why I spent a full 10 years exploring the spirit world before I ever become really involved in the therapy end of it.
So what did they have to say about or teach us about the spiritual world?
Uh-huh.
What did they have to teach us about the spiritual world?
What did they what?
What did they have to teach us or share with us about what's going on in the spiritual world?
Well, like in the beginning, that God says to people, don't eat of the fruit of life, and you have 2 forces, and you have a choice as to what one you want to follow. Mm-hmm. And so my understanding is that we are trying to learn unconditional love for everything that God has created.
Okay.
And that we come into a physical experience to learn different things. And so everybody in a conscious or in this life experience knows their level, knows if they've lived more than one life and how many they've lived, and they know their purpose for having come into this life. And it's all there for the asking.
But they don't remember it once they're incarnated.
Well, we know in our lives about conscious and subconscious.
Okay.
And people get into hypnotism, they talk about superconscious or higher self. So I ask, in the spirit world, what's the difference about these levels of consciousness? And the answer was, your conscious mind is what you do, your subconscious mind is what you are, and your soul is God. And so we are trying to create a physical experience, bringing these 3 systems into thinking and acting alike, recognizing that our soul or spirit is the more real.
Ah, so it's the experience we're coming down for.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And did they have anything else to say about, like, for example, sometimes I have to say that I believe some souls get a little off course. Hitler.
Well, they do that here.
Yeah, they do that here. So what did they have to, did you ever ask about what went awry with people like Hitler or mass murderers?
Well, it's the influence of power and authority and that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. And they're going to reap. What I have found in my own experience, that every negative emotion or action is an offense to ourselves.
Oh, okay. Can you say more about that?
Well, I began to find patterns that it don't happen immediately. It happens because of accumulation or intensity of these emotions to where the emotional system can no longer handle it, and it becomes physical.
I see. So you're saying it starts out emotionally and then it manifests into
Yeah,
physical.
so I've found what emotion affects what part of the bodies and so forth. And on the average, once the negative emotion is passed to the subconscious, on the average before it becomes physical is about 10 years.
Okay. So
And this means that the process is so subtle that suddenly we are having a problem before we realize it, that we've been working on it for a while.
So what would be an example of something that would manifest, like an emotion, and where would it manifest?
Well,
is there a pattern?
Yes. The most offensive thing to the mind, to the brain, is anger. in the chest area, fear and insecurity, worry in the stomach, hips and lack of support, feet restriction and so forth. And these are consistent in everybody.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. And so I began to communicate and state that any negative emotion or negative action is an offense to yourself, and show that pattern that it takes years before it moves from emotion to physical.
Mm-hmm. So how did you help people heal of their physical ailments?
Well, let them recognize the origin, cause, and solution. Once you offend a physical system, it has its origin. So you ask the mind for that experience. When that experience is brought to your awareness, you're encouraged to determine the cause, which is a negative emotion. Once the negative emotion is identified, then you ask the mind for its origin. And when you reach the origin of that emotion, you encourage the person that in that experience they had a choice and they could have responded in a more positive manner, and to imagine doing that. Once they have imagined, in other words, changed the negative to a positive, then you have the mind come forward and pick out every negative experience. And as they come into the mind, you change them like you did the first one. And to go through your entire life clearing that out takes about 30 seconds.
Oh, because it's all done unconsciously.
Yeah, right. It's all done with the subconscious, yeah.
Okay. And then what's the result of that?
Well, then sometimes the correction is immediate. Sometimes you add a little imaginary surgery, and sometimes a spirit entity fixes it.
Yeah, you relate a story in your book about a man who had come to you with a back injury. He had injured himself when he was 15 with his dad, lifting an engine. Yeah,
I think I'm supposed to give that information out Sunday when I had my interview, but this man was 40 years old, and when he was 15, he injured his back while helping his dad move an engine. And apparently he had had some medical observation of it, because he was one of the people in the research project that had a previous medical diagnosis that they couldn't help.
Right.
So when I reached the point, my procedure is to determine the origin, determine the cause, and then reach a point to see, can we fix it?
Okay.
And at the instant that I say, can we fix it, sometimes it's immediately fixed, sometimes it's done with imaginary surgery, and sometimes a spirit entity, spirit personality fixes it.
And you call this spirit assisted?
Yeah, and so what happened, I'll go ahead with the story.
Yeah.
What happened when I got to the point of asking him, can we fix it? He says suddenly he was out of his body, looking down, watching a pair of hands and arms come out of nowhere, cut his back open, remove a black spot at the bottom of the spine, and sew him up. And that took about 15 minutes.
And then what was the result of that?
2 days later, he called and he says, I don't think I need to come back because I'm no pain and I'm no restriction and I'm moving furniture around. But he says, I have a heart flutter. Maybe we can look at that. So he came back and I said, okay, I reached the point of, can we fix it? And he says, we can't, but Sydney can. I said, well, who's Sidney? He says, he's the guy that fixed my back last week. So I said, tell Sidney to fix it and describe to him what he's doing. So he said he cut my chest open and moving some meat around, and he got this tube, meaning an artery, and inside of the artery was a piece of skin attached to one wall, and as the blood went through it, fluttered. So he cut the thing and reamed that out and sewed him back up. So I was telling the head of the research project about it, and she says, well, have him come back and replay all of that so we can get it on tape. And so when he come back and I put him under hypnosis and started, he says, wait a minute, Sidney wants to talk to you. And so Sidney tells me that he was a general practitioner, and he's talking in real Australian brogue. I was a general practitioner for the Aborigines in 1842, and I'm coming through this man to help him to be a healer. I said, well, what was that back problem? He says, oh, it was a dead disc at the bottom of the spine. And I said, yeah, but my information is that when you remove a disc from the spine, it has to be fused, and therefore it's restriction. He says, you're right, except that one at the bottom, it serves no purpose, so we just took it out.
Oh, wonderful.
And he says that artery thing would be no problem unless that skin got attached to the other wall and it restrict the blood.
So did they verify this on x-rays afterwards?
No, but we had a 5-year follow-up to our volunteers, and he hadn't had no problem at all. And then 5 years later, he called me and told me he was a minister in Arizona now.
That's where he was doing his healing.
Yeah.
Oh, what else have you seen that we could describe as miraculous with healings?
Well, I'm going to tell you, and Josie over here, it was one of her family, so she can verify. But a 16-year-old nephew had a back problem. And they took him to the doctor, who x-rayed it and found a tumor on his mid-spine and scheduled a biopsy. Well, before the biopsy, she brought him to see me, and under hypnosis, we found that he had 2 previous experiences where a bully at school was on his back and so forth.
Okay.
And so I had him look at the problem and describe it. And he says, well, in mid-spine, there's a thing about the size of a plum, and it's purple in color. And the instant I said, can we fix it, he says it exploded into a bunch of little stars that disappeared. So when they went to take him back for his biopsy, I went along with them, and I asked the doctor, if you don't find anything, do you have to do a biopsy? And I had prepared the boy that no matter what their procedure, he would go through it without pain and discomfort. So they went into, the doctor looked at me like, what are you asking such a dumb question for? And they went into the room, and the technician, you could hear getting his equipment out, and he said, there ain't nothing there. The doctor says, hell, there ain't nothing there. Look at this x-ray we took a week ago. So they went ahead with the biopsy, and there wasn't nothing there.
So what did the doctors have to say after that?
Well, they were real happy that James had gone through the process without any pain or discomfort.
What did they say about the tumor
Nothing,
being gone?
period, nothing.
Interesting.
Yeah. Well, that's not uncommon.
Yes, I've heard that from a number of hypnotists. I always ask the question, what did the doctor say? And
Yeah, well,
they usually say nothing.
well, I had one incident where a lady in my student, one of the students come in limping one night, and what's the matter? And she says, well, I went to the doctor today, and he says I got a 1 1/4 calcium spur growing off of my right foot. And he said to remove it would be painful, and it would probably go back anyhow, so put a sponge in your shoe and release the pressure. So without any words at all, I touched her into hypnosis, got down, and I said, I'm going to file that spur off. And she started to cry. And I said, what's the matter? And she says, the flakes from that spur are getting into my foot, and it's painful. So I started stroking, not touching, but stroking from the heel to the, like this. Mm-hmm. She says, I don't know what you're doing, but it feels like you're pulling the pain right out through my toes. So when it eased, why, I stopped. Well, at the class the following week, why, she said she had felt some relief, so she went back to the doctor, who found that the spur had been shortened by a ½ inch. And he says, I don't know what you're doing in that class, but keep it up. So we worked at it again, and I thought by having the spur melt would be less than the flakes, but it painful anyhow. And so when the pain went away, why, the spur was gone.
So you got rid of it completely?
Yeah, but a few days later it started growing back.
I think the doctor gave her that suggestion.
Well, anyhow,
Go back again.
No, because I didn't look at the origin and cause.
Oh, yes.
So this time, why, I found that her and her husband were both in business together, and they bought a motor home to use on weekends to go out and enjoy themselves. And every time they went out, he would go to a fishing hole and sit fishing all day while she sat in the mobile home. That's restriction and resentment. So after the session, they went and sold the motor home, and the spur disappeared, and that's the last of it.
That's very interesting.
Yeah, well, and so these things are, they're very common, happen, you know, under hypnosis, that the mind can do these things that...
it's going to speak up, isn't it? Even if we can't.
Well, when I started, you could count the known hypnotists on your fingers, and now there's thousands of them.
That's right, there is.
And I think that if it keeps up, why, we'll be replacing the medical doctor.
Now, one last story about medical hypnosis, because you relate a fascinating story about a woman with MS.
Well, she came out of the Mayo medical clinic, which is world known, you know, and she was having an unwanted abortion. Her husband and doctor, she had 3 children, and for some reason they suggested an abortion, and she didn't want it. And she was very angry about it. And when she came out of surgery, why, the doctors found that the whole left side of her body was weak, multiple sclerosis, and they give her 4 years of life. So they heard about me through another man that I had worked with, multiple sclerosis, who referred them. And I had one session with her, and when it come to the point to where I could ask, can we fix it, she says, you don't have to fix it, find an alternate route. So I suggested that the energy would start at the bottom of the spine and move up, and when it got to the point of damage, she says it moved over a 1/4 inch, moved forward 1 inch and back, and made connection with the left side of her body. And the session ended. Well, that's the last I heard of her. And 26 years later, I was telling this story in one of my classes, and the girl says, you're talking about my aunt. And she's still around? Yeah. Well, her husband was a pilot for one of the major airlines, and so I called them to see if I could get in touch with them. They said, we can't do that, but we'll get in touch with them and tell them you're looking. 2 days later, she called me on the phone, and she says that after she left my office, the next day they moved out of town. She went back to college, got a family marriage counseling degree, and is a practicing hypnotherapist down at the beach here. And so she verified that she lived 30 years from the day I worked with her.
Oh, very fascinating.
Yeah, well.
That's a good one.
Yeah, yeah.
So, you have a theory of a pattern you've noticed with women with breast cancer, fear and insecurity.
Fear and insecurity, yeah. And if it's right breast, the emotion has been directed towards a male. If it's the left breast, it's been directed towards a female. And if it has no gender to it, then it's going to be involved in both breasts.
Oh, so if it's an issue towards, what do you mean by no gender? Just
the emotion, the negative emotion behind it is directed towards a male.
Okay.
And left side female. And that is consistent in everybody.
And so do you take them back to the origin?
Yeah, that's the first thing I do, yeah.
So regression is always the
first thing is take them back to the origin of the problem, determine the cause, and resolve it.
Okay, and what happens with the cancer when you do that?
Well, sometimes we have what we call resistant benefits. That a person is receiving some monetary support, that if they resolve the problem, they lose that. I had one lady that her problem was related to an attitude that she had towards her husband. And when she learned the cause, she says, I don't care, he's going to get it even if it kills me.
Oh, wow.
I tell my classes, I think that he probably didn't put the toilet seat down.
So even when she did find out, she was still bent on...
He was going to get his,
yeah,
even if it killed her.
Well, it probably did.
Yeah, yeah. And so those are the sort of things. And the most common, of course, is a person that's receiving monetary support, that if they resolve it, they'd lose that.
Like a disability, or they won't leave their husband because they're getting support, financial
yeah, well,
support.
something, of that nature, yeah.
Or any kind of secondary gain. Could it be emotional? They're getting something emotionally, or they're going to lose?
Well, some of the resistant benefits is revenge. Some of it is,
clearly.
like I say,